Good afternoon, and welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We are broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the East Coast, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. In our session today, we're going to be discussing the universal solvent, leadership. Our featured presenter today is Barbara Ardell with the Other Side Academy. More about Barbara in just a moment. But as always, we're glad to have you with us here today on Supply Chain Now Radio. So let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here today. Special thanks to our sponsor, TalentStream, a recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, manufacturing, and the supply chain space. To learn more, visit them at talentstreamstaffing.com. And special thanks to our sponsor, APICS Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. For those of you new to APICS, it is a premier industry association dedicated to end-to-end supply chain management. Around the world, our organization serves over 45,000 members. To learn more, visit us at apicsatlanta.org. Okay, so let's share some background information on our guest speaker today. You're in for a treat. Barbara Ardell brings a unique perspective to the supply chain community with her intersecting skills in strategic sourcing, change management, quality, training, and e-procurement. Barb spent the early part of her career with Procter & Gamble's world-class purchasing organization, where she sourced a variety of direct and indirect materials, managed the beauty care sourcing group, and where she was directly involved in P&G's first ERP implementation. She later owned and ran a training and consulting firm which focused on both hard and soft skills, including interpersonal communications, leadership, teamwork, diversity, and a total quality management. Barbara joined an e-sourcing pioneer where she trained and coached clients through the e-sourcing implementation process. She then spent 10 years at Paladin Associates, where she assisted clients with sourcing technology and influencing change, which we're going to learn more about today. Barb currently serves in a volunteer role at a new nonprofit where she is chair of the Other Side Academy, Atlanta's organizing committee. So Barbara, good afternoon. How are you?
I'm great, Scott. Thanks.
Glad to have you here today. So you've got a long history in supply chain, and it appears that you've taken a bit of a turn in your career. Tell us more about that.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Scott, for having me, and thanks to your audience for their interest in listening in today. You know, you're absolutely right. I have taken a bit of a turn in my career. You know, I'm a firm believer that careers have seasons, and I've been through a number of them over my long business career, and I just in the last year have taken yet another turn. And I actually have a confession to make. I am on my second failed retirement. It's apparently something I'm just not very good at. And I retired about 2 years ago, and after about a year, I found that I was in need of something to keep me occupied and stimulated. But at this point in my life, I really wanted to do something that was meaningful, something where I could give back, but at the same time have some flexibility to enjoy a little bit of that retirement. My last job was teaching and consulting on a program called Influencing Change, and I did that with supply chain organizations. And I worked with these organizations to improve their ability to influence behavior change. And as I'm sure all of your listeners know, there's just tremendous change going on in every organization today, supply chain, but all organizations as well. And actually, several years back, I transitioned from sourcing consulting to consulting on influencing change because I saw so many of my colleagues struggling with trying to implement new processes or new strategies or new technologies. And there was so much of the deer in the headlights going on with change that when I was introduced to this influencer model, my reaction was sort of, oh my gosh, where have you been all my life? And I really felt compelled to bring that model to the supply chain organization. So you might be asking yourself, so how did I get from that role to my current one as a volunteer with the Other Side Academy Atlanta? Well, actually, there is a connection. Some of my former colleagues, actually the developers of the influencer approach, we're implementing a program in Salt Lake City which used the influencer model to save lives by changing the behavior of really the most lost among us. And I was just really touched by the program and frankly by the opportunity. And so when I found myself wanting for something meaningful to do, I reached out to those former colleagues and volunteered to help bring that incredible program to Atlanta.
So I'm intrigued. Tell us more about the Other Side Academy and what it serves to do.
Absolutely. So the Other Side Academy is a residential post-secondary vocational and life skills program for career criminals, long-term drug abusers, and the homeless. So not exactly an easy population to serve. And our program here in Atlanta is going to be a branch of the Other Side Academy flagship, which is located in Salt Lake City, which was founded about 3 years ago, not quite 3 years ago. And it's modeled after a program called Delancey Street, which is in San Francisco and which has been in operation since the early 70s, so well over 40 years. And this audience may not know much about recidivism, but recidivism is the reoffending or being rearrested within a period of 3 years after incarceration, or if you're a drug abuser, using again within that 3-year period. And nationwide, recidivism tends to run somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. And Delancey Street has about only a 10 to 20% recidivism rate for those who complete their 2-year program. So a huge success in reducing recidivism. There are a few things that are unique about the program, which the feedback I've gotten from people, real selling points to this program. And first is that it's self-sustaining. And what that means is the program funds itself through various social enterprises, things like a moving company, a food truck, a thrift boutique. And so the revenues that come in from the businesses that are staffed by the students go to supporting the program. And therefore, the program can be offered free to students. So it's not like they have to take out a bunch of student loans to participate in the program. They don't have to have insurance. It's not like a drug treatment program where they kick you out in 30 days when your insurance runs out. So it's self-sustaining, it's free to students, and we take no government funding. And so it's really a savings to taxpayers, kind of like what's not to like, right?
Wow, what an incredible organization, and what a great addition to the Other Side Academy team that they're getting in Barbara Ardell. Amazing amount of leadership and capability that they're adding. So looking forward to get updates as your mission continues to evolve. So I know from our past interactions that you've been convinced of the power of the influencer model and how it can help all leaders. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for your endorsement and support. It's always encouraging to have people get as excited about it as I am. Well, as I said, for several years, I taught the influencer model and consulted with supply chain organizations to help them get better at driving culture change and process changes and so on in their organizations. And actually, what I'd like to do today is to do a quick overview of the influencer model, sort of a 25-cent tour, if you will. And what we're going to do, though, is look at it in the context of the Other Side Academy. But just one caveat, although the examples that I'm going to share today will focus on how this is being implemented at the Other Side Academy, I need to guarantee your listeners that this will work in their supply chain organization. So although our focus today is looking at how this applies with the Other Side Academy, please don't think that this isn't relevant for what you're doing in your organization. So with that said, let me kind of jump into that. And I thought that since we're talking about leadership today, that it might be important that we define our terms and really look at what is leadership. And I know we're in a virtual environment and I can't see people raise their hands, but I'm going to ask a question anyway. And my question is, how many of you are leaders? How many of you are leaders? And what I would say is you should all have your hands up. And why is that? Well, I think about leaders in two ways. I think about big L leaders, and I also think about little L leaders. So big L leaders are leaders that have that designation because of their position power or their title. And they're viewed as being leaders because of the position that they're in. But I also like to think of little L leaders. And frankly, I think this is where we most often see leadership most of the time. So most of us are little L leaders most of the time. And that's when you see leaders who are in that role because of a passion that they have and because of the skills and the expertise that they bring to bear on a particular endeavor that they're working on. It was funny, I just ran across a quote this morning as I was reading through some of my LinkedIn mail. And the quote says, "It's not your title that makes you a leader. It's your influence, inspiration, and initiative." And I thought that did a great job of summing up what I mean by a little L leader. And so let's use that broader definition for leadership as we go throughout the program today. So I'd like to share another quote with you. This is from one of my favorite leadership gurus, Joseph Grenny. And Joseph says that leadership is intentional influence. So leadership is intentional influence. So if that's true, we must be effective at influence in order to be effective leaders. Now, I actually had the privilege of working with Joseph the last several years, and actually a number of his colleagues at Vital Smarts as I was teaching the Influencing Change curriculum. Joseph is a 4 times New York Times best-selling author, and he's also the founder of the Other Side Academy. And Joseph goes on to say about influence that it is the most important capacity we possess. So the most important capacity we possess is our ability to influence behavior. So again, you must be an effective influencer in order to lead effectively. So let me give you a little bit of background here. So in 2008, Joseph and his colleagues published the New York Times bestseller Influencer, and you'll see the cover of the book here on the left-hand side. And of course, Amazon has everything, right? So you can get it there. But in doing the research for this book, they read over 17,000 journal articles. They reviewed 30-some years of social science research. But most importantly, they studied leaders who had been majorly effective at influencing huge change. And importantly, they had the data to prove it. And one of the master influencers that they studied as part of the research for the influencer book was a woman by the name of Dr. Mimi Silbert, who's the founder of an organization called the Delancey Street Foundation, which is based in San Francisco. Just a little bit more about Delancey Street. So they were founded in the early 70s, and their goal was to reclaim lives and reduce recidivism. And their average student has 16 felonies. And as I mentioned earlier, whereas the national recidivism rate is 60 to 70%, over their 40 plus years of existence, their recidivism rate runs only 10 to 20% for those who complete their 2-year program. Now, any business leader, any effective business leader casts a vision for what they're trying to achieve, and that is supported by a business case. So I'd like to lay out quickly the business case for the Other Side Academy. So here are some statistics which I think you'll agree are pretty astounding, and that may not be the right word, depressing may be a better one. So in the United States, over 700,000 individuals are released from state and federal prisons on a yearly basis, and 95% of all inmates return to their communities. So these people that we're putting away, they're coming back. And that doesn't include the 9 to 10 million more people who go through our local jails annually. About 40% of the federal prisoners and more than 60% of state prisoners are rearrested. That's recidivism within 3 years. And if you look at it just from a cost standpoint, the US spends $68 billion a year on federal, state, and local corrections. And I know in Georgia, we spend $1 billion on incarceration every year. And you know, it's interesting, we talk about recidivism. The department that manages prisons is called the Department of Corrections, and that's got to be the misnomer of the year, because it doesn't appear that there's a lot of correction that's actually going on. Another thing to recognize is that African Americans are disproportionately affected by incarceration. So African Americans make up 12 to 13% of the US population, but they make up 35% of jail inmates. So these are some really compelling reasons for why we need a program like the Other Side Academy. And just quickly before we get into the model, I'd like to look at some of the impact that the program in Salt Lake City has had in its short existence of less than 3 years. So already they've saved the Utah taxpayers over $21 million through a cost avoidance of incarceration expenses. They started out with 1 moving truck. They're now up to 7, and they are the #1 rated moving company in Salt Lake City. And I'd really encourage you to go to one of these review sites, Yelp or one of the others, and look at some of the reviews. It's pretty impressive, and I'd even say heartwarming to hear the glowing comments about the customer service and the quality, the responsiveness. It's really amazing. When the Other Side Academy started up, they set a goal of becoming cash flow positive in 2 years. You remember, they're self-sustaining, but they felt they needed 2 years to ramp up and get to the point where the revenues from the enterprises would support their expenses. And they actually made it in 20 months, which was 4 months ahead of schedule. Pretty impressive. About a year ago, there was a need for a zoning hearing. The city of Salt Lake came back and was wanting to reconsider the zoning for the Other Side Academy residents and businesses in downtown Salt Lake. And what you might have expected is the neighbors would have turned out en masse to get that organization, that residents, out of their neighborhood. You know, it's one of those not in my backyard phenomenon. And what they found instead was just the exact opposite, that over 60 neighbors turned out for this zoning hearing, supporting the Other Side Academy because they had been such incredible neighbors in the 2 years that they had been there. To date, they've graduated about 25 students. About 72% of those have decided to stay on an additional year. Either they don't feel they're ready or they want to give back and help other students. And then just in the last week, the Other Side Academy was awarded the Ernst & Young 2018 Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award for the Utah region. So very, very well-deserved recognition. And if you want to learn more or read more, I'd really encourage you to check out the Facebook page for the Other Side Academy. So just if you search the Other Side Academy on Facebook, you'll see lots of additional anecdotes, videos, stories, etc. It's a fun website. Last thing I want to do before we actually move into the model is share with you these 12 beliefs. So the Other Side Academy has an explicit set of ethics and values or concepts that they teach and they uphold in their programs, so in their work and in their lives. In business, we might think of these as our operating principles, so it's sort of the same thing. So what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the influencer model, and we'll see how that model reinforces the values and the beliefs and how that drives the vital behaviors necessary for change. And again, I just want to remind you that this model, although we're focusing on the Other Side of Academy, which is a social enterprise, a nonprofit, that this will absolutely work in your organization as well. So with that said, let's dive into the model. So this is the influencer model. It's got 3 main components, and it is generic, so it works whether you're applying it to a desired behavior change at work or at home or even on yourself personally. And I have used it personally to help myself shed a few extra pounds, and so it does work at home. As I mentioned, I've trained and consulted with clients using this model for several years, and the feedback that we get from them is that they love it because it is very simple, only 3 components, and yet it is extremely powerful. And so I'd like to take you through the model here. First of all, it begins on the far right. As Stephen Covey would say, we need to begin with the end in mind. So it starts off with having you clarify your measurable results. And here what we want to do is have you define what it is specifically that you want to achieve. And this is where you want to come up with that SMART statement: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You've all heard that SMART acronym. And for the Other Side Academy, their result that they've defined is to reclaim lives and reduce recidivism of career criminals, long-term drug abusers, and the homeless to less than 50% as measured at 3 years post-graduation. So that is their result statement. And you would want to craft something similar for whatever organization behavior change you're trying to achieve. The next step in the process is to find and define what we call vital behaviors. Think about this as the Pareto principle. So what few behaviors will lead the greatest amount of change? And when I teach this in supply chain organizations, we suggest that you really discipline yourself to come up with only 2 or 3 vital behaviors. Because if you get those right, all of the others will fall into place. So in the case of the Other Side Academy, there are 2 vital behaviors. The first one is to take responsibility for others. And I know I went through those 12 beliefs or past those 12 beliefs pretty quickly, but one of them was each one, teach one. And that certainly supports the vital behavior of taking responsibility for others. The second one is to hold others accountable. And the 12th belief that it is supporting there is what we call 200% accountability. So as a student, I'm responsible for my own behavior, but I'm also responsible for your behavior and making sure that you're living up to the 12 beliefs and the commitments that you have made. So 2 vital behaviors at the Other Side Academy: take responsibility first and hold each other accountable. And then we move into the third component of the model, which is to use the 6 sources of influence. And actually the 6 sources do double duty. First, you use them to diagnose why the desired behavior change either is not likely to happen or isn't happening or isn't likely to happen without intervention. And once we've diagnosed the causes using these 6 sources of influence, we then go back through them and use them a second time to develop strategies which will both motivate as well as enable change. So those are the 3 components of the model: clarify measurable results, find the vital behaviors, and then use those 6 sources of influence. So in my experience, the 6 sources of influence are really the secret sauce for influence and therefore for leadership effectiveness. So we're really going to spend the bulk of our time looking at those. And what I want to do is first explain the 6 source model, and then we'll go back and go through each of the 6 sources individually and provide some examples of how those are actually applied at the Other Side Academy in order to drive results. But again, I think you'll get a sense of how they work, and you can get a sense of how you could apply those in a supply chain organization. So the 6 source model is a 2x3 matrix. And for any change to take place, any behavior change to take place, an individual asks themselves 2 questions. And the first question they ask themselves is it worth it? Is it worth it for me to make that change? And that is the motivation piece. So that covers the motivation column. But the second question individuals ask themselves before making a behavior change is, can I do it? Do I have the ability to make the desired change? So for any change to take place, an individual has to ask themselves, is it worth it? Am I motivated? Can I do it? Do I have the ability? And you really need both for any behavior change to take place. Then the research that they did for Influencer further identified that there are 3 different types of forces that drive motivation and ability. And let's take a look at those real quickly. So these are the 3 rows of our 2x3 matrix. So the first row is personal. So what personal forces can be brought to bear to drive motivation and drive ability? The second row is social. So how do others affect motivation and ability? And the third row is what we call structural, or how do things affect motivation and ability? And what they found through their research is that we often underwhelm overwhelming problems. and that influencers succeed where others fail because they overdetermine success. And what we mean by that is that successful influencers use a critical mass of all 6 sources of influence to make change inevitable. We kind of overpower that stubborn change that we're trying to make. And if you'd like more information on the research that supports the model, I'd really encourage you to download this research report. It's called How to 10x Your Influence. And you can either download it from the Vital Smarts website, or if you just Google 10x Your Influence, you'll be able to find it very, very easily. And what the research found is that by using 4 or more sources of influence simultaneously targeted towards those vital behaviors, that you increase your success rate tenfold. And I think in recognition of the superiority of this approach, in 2009, it was named Change Management Approach of the Year by MIT Sloan Management Review, which is a fairly prestigious publication, I think you'd agree. So next, what I'd like to do is to go through individually the 6 sources of influence and give examples of how they're applied at the Other Side Academy to save lives by changing behavior. So our first source of influence is what we call personal motivation, or help them love what they hate. And here is where we want to help the desired behavior become meaningful, become a moral passion or a part of the individual's self-definition. So at the Other Side Academy, in order to be accepted, students have to be at the point where they're willing to do absolutely anything in order to change. They must be willing to make a minimum 2-year commitment to a process that's extremely rigorous. And they have to apply in person. You can't have your mom or your wife or your child apply for you. You have to apply in person. And the people doing the interviewing are a pretty tough audience because they're people just like you, except they're a little further along in the process. They were just like you in the not too distant past, so you can't really put anything over on them. Once the students are in the program, their motivation then is sparked because the students see what's possible, since again, the program is run by people just like them, people who are just a little bit farther along in the process. And over time, as they stay, as they become more involved, their self-image changes. You know, as they work together with the other students, they deliver quality work, they lead upstanding lives, their self-image changes significantly for the better. And that feeds into that self-definition and breeds that moral passion. Let's move on to source 2. Source 2 is personal ability, or help them do what they can't. And this is where we provide the training and the coaching for the new skills that are required. Now, many of the students who come to the Other Side Academy aren't lacking motivation. They've got plenty of great reasons for wanting to change their lives. Unfortunately, many of them just don't know how. They just don't know how to live a sober life, an orderly life, or an honest life. They don't need more motivation. What they need is more ability. And you know, I think this is particularly true now that we have 2nd and 3rd generation poverty and drug abuse, where these important life skills may not have been role modeled or may not have been taught. And actually, they may not need rehabilitation. What they may need is habilitation, because they haven't learned it for the first time. You can't rehabilitate if they haven't first been habilitated. So they just haven't learned it for the first time. Now, as part of the Other Side Academy program, there is on-the-job training, on-the-job vocational training, and that is part of that each one, teach one belief. And so these are some of the vocational skills that are learned by the students at the Other Side Academy. But I think one of the things that really distinguishes the Other Side Academy from other programs is it doesn't just focus on job skills, but it focuses importantly on life skills as well. So the students participate in daily seminars, in group meetings, in individual activities, where they learn some of these critical life skills that are shown here on the slide, things like teamwork, meeting commitments, accountability, handling frustration, things that they just may never have learned in their lives, or they may have learned a long, long time ago and forgotten. And so importantly, they also learn these life skills here. Our third source of influence, source 3, is social motivation or provide encouragement. And this is where you want to get social forces working for you. You know, social forces will affect behavior, either in a positive way or in a negative way. And this is certainly true in your organization as well. So you want to get the social forces working on your behalf or on behalf of the change that you're trying to make. And this is a huge part of the program at the Other Side Academy. And frankly, I think this is one of the more powerful sources of influence that you would experience in implementing in your organization, the power of these social forces. Recall that the students at the Other Side Academy and the leadership share that common background, the common incarceration or drug abuse or homelessness, or perhaps all three. And therefore the leadership and the students who are a little farther along in the process have credibility with one another. And so they use positive peer pressure, they use role modeling provided by these more senior students and by the leadership to drive the desired behavior change in the younger, the newer students. They have weekly community sessions that they call games, where they call each other out on unacceptable behaviors, things that have violated their 12 beliefs or have gone against agreed upon behaviors or agreed upon commitments. And the games provide that social pressure to help people get back into compliance with the 12 beliefs. So social forces are huge in driving change at the Other Side Academy. Source 4 is social ability or provide assistance. And here you seek the support of those who enable. You know, there are a lot of people in our lives who enable us. And if you think about that, I'm sure that's true of you. Now, some of those people enable us in a positive way, and we call those people friends. And there are other people who enable us in a negative way, and we call those people accomplices. And what we're trying to do at the Other Side Academy is to get those positive influence, our friends encouraging us to do the right things and enabling us to do the right things. At the Other Side Academy, the students are interdependent and each must carry his or her own weight in order for the community to be successful. They must also work together for the good of the community. And so we have one of our 12 beliefs, which is you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. Let me give you just a couple of examples of social ability at the Other Side Academy. One example would be that all students before they leave the Other Side Academy will get their GED. And if they need help, they get tutelage from other students at the Other Side Academy who have already gotten there. So they get tutoring from their peers. The students also work together in various social enterprises, as I mentioned earlier, the moving truck, thrift boutique, food truck, etc., to deliver exemplary customer service. So these are examples of social ability, helping one another to achieve the desired behavior change. Source 5 is structural motivation. Here we want to change the economy, and we ensure that the rewards encourage the desired vital behavior. And these are what you think about as your traditional carrots and sticks, things like pay, promotions, perks, performance reviews, punishment. Those would be the terms we might use in a business context. In looking at the Other Side Academy, some of the rewards that are in place include living accommodations. So when a student first enters the program, they may be in a dorm room that they share with 6 or 8 other students. And eventually, as they mature in the program, they acquire the necessary skills, they prove themselves, they may be moved to a semi-private or potentially even a private room. So living accommodations are used to reward students who achieve the desired behavior changes. They also have promotions. So when a student comes into the program, they may start off by relatively easy tasks like setting the table or doing laundry or peeling potatoes in the kitchen. And as they develop particularly social skills, and can be trusted to go out and interact with the public and provide good customer service. They may be put on a moving company team. They may get promoted to a manager on that team. And so there are promotions, and those are used to recognize students who are changing their behavior in a positive way. There's group recognition for individual skills. I mentioned in games, they call people on the carpet for undesirable behavior. But likewise, there's group recognition as the students demonstrate desired behaviors and acquire necessary skills. And finally, there's what we call WAM, which is walking around money. When students first come into the program, they're not given a lot of money because they probably just go out and buy drugs with it. But as they prove themselves, as they demonstrate positive behaviors, as they acquire skills, as the leadership feel they can be trusted, they're given some walking around money, and that amount increases as they move up through the organization and as they prove their trustworthiness and develop the desired behaviors and skills. Now, there are also disincentives. So there are things that they call haircuts. And these are public reprimands at community meetings for unacceptable behavior. So if you've done something wrong, you will be brought before the community, and your behavior will be shared with that community, and you will receive some sort of a consequence. For example, you might be given an extra assignment for dishes, sort of like KP in the military. So those are how some of the disincentives work. Let's move on to our last source of influence, and that is source 6, which is structural ability. And here is where we want to change the environment. We want to structure the environment to ensure that doing the right thing is also the easiest thing to do. And structural ability includes things like space, facilities, data, cues, and tools. And, you know, I think the problem with so many traditional treatment programs, and the reason they fail, is because they don't address the environment. You have someone get out of prison, they return to the old neighborhood. You have them get out of rehab, they return back to the environment where they're tempted, they're surrounded by other people using drugs. You all have probably heard the saying, it's like an alcoholic trying to recover in a bar. So we return these vulnerable individuals to these challenging environments, and then we wonder why they fail, why they relapse. Conversely, at the Other Side Academy, students are in a 24/7 positive environment for a minimum of 2 years, and many students choose to stay longer because they realize how vulnerable they are, and they feel that they need the safety of that environment to keep living right until it becomes a part of who they are. So students are surrounded by a community full-time that's encouraging and that reinforces those correct behaviors. And the students act as if, so act as if is another of those 12 beliefs, until the new behavior becomes a part of who they are, it becomes ingrained in how they now live. So those are the 6 sources of influence, and I suspect that many of you have used one or more of the 6 sources to drive change in the past. And perhaps some of you have used all of them at one time or another. But remember, the power comes from applying all 6 sources of influence simultaneously to those identified vital behaviors in order to drive lasting change. And I would submit to you that if this approach can change the behavior of career criminals, long-term drug abusers, and the homeless, certainly it can drive the desired behavior changes in your organization. So with that said, I'd just like to thank you all for your time and attention. And of course, thanks to Scott and TalentStream and APICS Atlanta for the opportunity to address this audience today.
Thanks, Barbara. What a great presentation. Very practical, and I'm sure all of our listeners can see the effective application supply chain. So you know that supply chain makes it happen. So undoubtedly, with what you've rolled out here about the Other Side Academy, I bet we're going to have some listeners that want to plug into the organization. So is there anything our listeners can do to help with the Other Side Academy?
Well, thanks so much for asking, Scott. I really appreciate that. Well, I guess, first of all, I'd invite you to visit our website. It's up here on the screen, but it's TOSA, TOSA-Atlanta.com. That's our website. There are some great videos that are on the FAQ page, and I encourage you to take a look at those. I don't do this on the website to sign up for our newsletter. Our inaugural edition will be out this month in June of 2018. And of course, we'd love to have you like our Facebook page so that you can stay abreast of what's going on as we develop. We're about on a 3-year glide path for startup. And the Facebook pages, ours is the Other Side Academy -Atlanta. And also the mothership Facebook page is just the Other Side Academy. And they, as I said earlier, they've got some amazing content on their page as well. And please, of course, contact me if you'd like more information or if you'd like to get involved. And if you feel led, we'd certainly appreciate any financial support for our, and I want to emphasize this, our one-time only capital raise, which will support our first 2 years of operation. And also to have you spread the word and connect us to others who you think might be interested. Apart from the Other Side Academy, if you're interested, if you're a supply chain organization and you're interested in learning more about the Influencing Change program that I was involved in developing and teaching and consulting, I'd encourage you to contact my former colleague, Don Hepner at Paladin Associates, because they are still offering that excellent program, and they can tell you a lot more about how you can apply that in your organization and the excellent results that you could expect. And then, of course, I'd like to acknowledge Vital Smarts, the authors of the Influencer book. And if you'd like to learn more about Influencer or their other programs, Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, and Getting Things Done, you visit the Vital Smarts website or reach out to them by phone at the number that's shown up there as well.
All right. Thanks so much, Barb. Appreciate your time and perspective today. We look forward to some future presentations in person in Atlanta later this summer. We're going to be concluding our session this afternoon on a few final items. First, we'd invite our audience to join us for one of our upcoming webinars. We've got several intriguing sessions coming up focused on topics such as reverse logistics, one of my favorites, lip service leadership, the gender pay gap, IQ, and you can learn more on those and other sessions at apicsatlanta.org. Secondly, if you're in the state of Georgia and you want to engage the next generation of students, we'd welcome you to join us for our Supply Chain 101 initiative, where we're taking teams of volunteers into elementary schools to talk supply chain with students. Contact us for more information. Finally, don't miss out on our upcoming workshop in Atlanta with Bo Groover of the Effective Syndicate. Lead the people and manage the process. I'm sure Barb's heard that once or 1,000 times. On June 15th, this Friday in Atlanta. Of course, feel free to reach out to me if there's anything we can do to serve as a resource for you and your organization. You'll see the email there, evp@apicsatlanta.org. Hey, Barbara, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts on your end?
Yeah, just 2 final points I'd like to reinforce. The first is, remember that leadership is intentional influence. So if you really want to be an effective leader, you need to get good at influence. And secondly, that influencers succeed where others fail because they marshal a critical mass of all 6 sources of influence to make change inevitable. So I'd like to say thanks again and to wish all of your audience the very best with all of your influence challenges.
Great, terrific. Thank you, Barbara Ardell with the Other Side Academy. As we wrap up today, we'd like to give a big thanks to our guest speaker, Barbara Ardell with the Other Side Academy, for this presentation and her insight. We'd also like to thank our sponsors again, APICS Atlanta and TalentStream. Of course, a big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode. Have a wonderful week, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Thanks, everyone.